So, um, one thing I wanted to talk about was nostalgia. Uh, I'd recently, my partner will tell you that I am a avid Redditor. I am, I would absolutely say that I am addicted to Reddit. I don't suffer withdrawal or anything, but I am frequently on it. So, I imagine that many of my videographic musings will be inspired by things I see on Reddit. Um, I recently discovered a subreddit, and if you're unfamiliar with the what a subreddit is, well, go to Reddit. um, there are all kinds of subreddits dedicated to just about anything you could think of. It's basically the new bulletin board systems or Usenet groups, whatever you want to say. For those oldies amongst us who remember the old days of the internet. Um, Recently discovered a subreddit dedicated to 80s design. Now, having been made in the 80s myself, and being a precocious child, and appreciating architecture and design, having grown up in a household filled with aesthetes, and ultimately wanting to pursue a career in architecture, naturally, a subreddit devoted to the architecture and design cues of my childhood, I absolutely gravitated towards. Now, previously on Reddit, quite some time back, long before I discovered this subreddit, someone had posted something, and it's funny because I have a terrible memory. I constantly am losing things. I'm constantly forgetting things. I have prosopagnosia, mildly a face blindness, which is frustrating and embarrassing. And I don't, it's not the worst thing to have, but when it's, a single letter in the alphabet soup of things that I have to deal with mentally. Anyway, long story short, my memory's not great. So for an obscure video, which, was terrible quality, obviously VHS quality or worse, and it was dated, I believe, 82 or 83, and it was in the interior of a mall, and I remember seeing this post and thinking, that looks like the Jefferson Valley Mall. And I grew up in Westchester, New York, in a small town called Mohegan Lake, and our nearest mall worthwhile visiting, not nearest mall, but nearest mall worthwhile visiting, was the Jefferson Valley Mall, or the JV Mall. And someone posted in the comments, like, how the hell did you know that this absolutely is the JV Mall, the Jefferson Valley Mall? And it just, the mall had a very distinct design. And if you were to look at things like 80s design, Memphis style architecture, design, if you're older than 25, 30, you'll remember the way things look. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a very distinct design language that, accompanied a lot of retail, residential, styles that were contemporary to the time. And the Jefferson Valley Mall was built in the late 70s, so its architecture was a little bit, more thrown back, but they definitely upgraded the mall. And anyway, I didn't want you to come here and listen to me talk about a mall. It was more what this subreddit and this post are stirring within me. And it's nostalgia. I remember, so many details come flooding back, looking at this subreddit and thinking of things from my childhood that are brought to the surface of my memory, triggered by looking at things in this 80s design subreddit. And I think the term nostalgia is usually a term, I think, that, at least for me, is a term that I would associate with the older generations, my parents and my grandparents, and they think of Norman Rockwell-esque, mental landscapes, the small town Americana, Sunday chicken dinners after church, a young man and a young woman shyly holding hands and sneaking a peek in the gazebo under the moonlight, and coming back from the war and, listening to Buddy Holly and, I don't know, I can't think of any musicians from that era off the top of my head. Elvis, the like thinking of like good old days, olden times, but really nostalgia belongs to anyone who, having aged through their life and reaching hopefully maturity and adulthood, looks back and thinks on what was to them simpler, happier times. And it's interesting because I don't really know any Greek to speak of, but the end of, it's two Greek words, and I had looked them up. I knew that the second part, algia, is like, when you think of pain relief medication, analgesics, or fibromyalgia, algia means pain. And nostos means like return, or homecoming, or to go back to, from what I was able to discern. And it's true. I know that being someone who has a very difficult time wanting to let go of the past, and I don't mean that as in a grudge holding sense, but I carry the weight of loss very tightly, and it's very frustrating. I almost at times feel like I'm a prisoner of nostalgia and loss, and it's frustrating. Nostalgia should be like bittersweet. It should, you should long happily on those, you should reflect happily on those memories. Think of good times, think of happy memories, think of the things from your past that formed who you are, helped develop you as a person. And it's, for me, when I think of like the Jefferson Valley Mall in Jefferson Valley, New York, I think of my grandfather, when my grandfather would come up from Long Island for a little coffee. When he would come up from Long Island, it was easy to corral 5 grandchildren and take them to the mall. You would go to a park, like the Theodore Roosevelt Park in Yorktown, I believe it was. Or we'd go to like, Toys R Us, or, we'd go to there was the lake in Mohegan Lake in the summer. But a lot of times we'd wind up going to the mall because my grandfather was a fairly well-to-do individual, and my parents were not people who lacked means themselves, but when you have 5 children, sometimes it's a little easier to, hand the grandchildren over to your parents and let them shoulder the burden of dinner and clothes shopping and toy shopping for a day. It's like a ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure or something, you know. And it didn't take much to make us happy back then. But it's the thing about nostalgia. You know, it's good to reflect on happy memories. And it's very easy to wander too deeply and pine over the should haves and what ifs and if only I could have. You know, we can only move forward. Time moves in one direction. And until Doc Brown and Marty pop out from behind a corner and say, hey, you want to ride? You know, you have to look forward. You can't look back too much. And I know, as Alice said in her Times in Wonderland, that she often gives herself good advice but very seldom follows it. I know that I recognize that it's important to not allowing yourself be consumed by nostalgia for times gone by, to wallow in the long-term grief for who and what you've lost, times that you cannot recapture. You should use your experiences to develop as a person. You should be given to introspection, to be able to look inward and reflect and ask, the questions about how you can be the best version of yourself. My grandfather is gone, and I owe a lot of my life to him and his intervention and intercession on my behalf for many of my colossal cock-ups. And I know that it's very easy to want to live in the past and think of the happy memories of my childhood and being doted upon by my grandparents, but I know that my grandfather would want me to grow, to mature, to become the specimen of manhood that I know he believed I was capable of becoming. It's dogs fighting outside. And this is tough to talk about, because as I said, I do hold, or I should say, harbor the feelings of loss and grief so strongly within me for those whom I've lost. And my grandfather was, and there's no replacing him. But as with anyone out there who is 20, 30, 50, 80 years old and finds themselves longing for and missing those days gone by, I'm reminded of I think it was a quote from Aesop's Fables, where one of the characters said, "You can feed on hopes, but they won't make you fat." Think back happily on those memories. Allow them to bring a smile to your face. Think of what you had and not of what you lack. Be grateful that you have those happy memories, because there are many people who don't have happy memories to look back on, which is truly tragic. And it's hopefully if someone has no happy memories on which they can reflect, hopefully life and good fortune will turn around and provide them with some happy memories to make going forward. But for those of you, especially in these increasingly troubled and chaotic times, so filled with uncertainty and just worry, where it would be very easy to want to bury oneself in an escapist attempt of reliving the past. Don't use your happy memories to put a smile on your face, but don't let them distract you from doing everything you can to make the best of the time you are given, the time you have now.